All right, we'll get started in just a minute here. Greg, Mike, you guys ready?
Yep, ready when you are.
Okay, we'll give it to the top of the hour. Just as we're going to be getting started in a second, I want to just make a quick announcement for our participants. If you do have questions, please feel free to put them either in the chat box or the Q&A, and we'll work on toward the end, we'll have a question and answer section. Same thing. Anybody who's tuning in on Facebook live stream, please feel free to just type any questions in the chat box. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm Dan Cornelius with the Intertribal Agriculture Council. I'm the Technical Assistance Specialist for the Great Lakes region. And we're excited today to have a training on the USDA Value Added Producer Grant. IAC is partnered with USDA Rural Development for a good number of years now on this program. And as I'm going to talk about in just a second here, it's been exciting to see some of the past successful value-added producer projects come to fruition and really providing an important piece of our intertribal food distribution system today. So Greg, if you want to go to the next slide. Before I turn it over to USDA, just want to give a little bit of background on the Intertribal Agriculture Council. We were formed in 1987, and our main mission is helping to promote conservation, development, and use of native agricultural resources for the betterment of our people. And we go to the next slide. How we do that, we have a technical assistance network. We've got specialists across the country that can provide assistance on a host of different USDA programs, everything from conservation to farm loans, insurance, really across all of USDA's 17 different agencies. We can help to provide assistance. We also have an American Indian Foods program, and our foods program, as you can see here, administers the Made by American Indians trademark, as well as working with USDA's Foreign Ag Service to operate an export program. I know that they our foods program folks, I think today, are just taking down the booth at the Natural Foods Expo in Anaheim. But great resource here, no cost on the Made by American Indians trademark, and a lot of other support that the foods program can provide. I'll also mention we've got a policy program, and that policy program, in coordination with partners, helps to lead the Native Farm Bill Coalition. So that Native Farm Bill Coalition has just been kicking off and getting into gear right now of looking at the 2023 or if maybe 2024 Farm Bill. So a lot of great work that happens there. And so that's a bit of background on the Intertribal Agriculture Council, and provide a bit more context on really why this value-added producer grant program is so important. As you know, really, when we look at the pandemic and the impact that the pandemic is continuing to have on our supply chains and just basic food access and food security, we need more product. We need more of foods that can be feeding our community, that can be going onto store shelves. And this value-added producer grant is really one of those main programs that USDA has available to help to do the feasibility studies, provide the working capital. And I'll mention as before I hand off to USDA, is that we have right now several exciting opportunities through USDA that are available of the Local Food Purchase Assistance Cooperative Agreement. USDA is putting out $410 million to state and tribal governments to buy from socially disadvantaged producers foods that go to feeding our communities. The challenge is we need more food and value-added products. And so this is one of those programs that can do that. That LFPA, that Local Food Purchase Assistance Program, that's operated by USDA's Ag Marketing Service, that also has open right now several other programs, including the Local farmers market, or I'm sorry, the local food promotion program and the farmers market promotion program are two sister programs, as well as the regional food system partnership. But I'm going to drop some links into the chat box. A lot of other opportunities that are open right now, but those are some big key ones that I think really connect and tie into this value-added producer grant. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Daniels, Greg York, and Ted Bulow with Rural Development to talk more on the value-added producer grant.
Thanks, Ted.
Yeah, thank you, Dan.
Before we get into value added, Dan had asked I talk about a couple different programs that are available, and I too will put into the chat the links to these programs. The first one is the Mpep program, Meat and Poultry Processing Expansion Program. That's open until the 11th of April. We're looking for grant applications that can provide up to 20% of the project cost for to expand meat processing capacity, and tribes are eligible for this program. Again, that's $150 million available. The maximum grant amount is $25 million, or 20% of your project cost, whichever is less. So that's a program that is again open until April 11th. The other program that is open is the Food Supply Guaranteed Loan Program. That can be for basically any program. You would have to have a commercial lender to help with that and provide a guarantee of loss for the lender. It allows you to get a little bit better rates and terms. So if you're looking to enhance your food supply chain, you're looking for some loan funds, that would be a possibility. The other site that I'm going to drop in is it's www.usda.gov/meats. That's a link to all the meat programs that are available now that through the administration, and it gives you the opportunity to go in to this site, sign up for your for any notices for programs that are not open right now, so you'll be able to get updates for when these programs do become available and they're looking for solicitation for funding. So I think those are the three programs we kind of talked about, Dan, that you wanted me to cover. So without further ado, Greg, if you want to take it away, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mike, and thanks, Dan. And I want to just thank everyone for taking the time to dial into the presentation today. We're going to definitely be talking about the value-added producer grant, and that'll be the focus of the training. Just real quick, my name is Greg York. I'm one of the management and program analysts here with the National Office of USDA, and have a little bit of experience as well working on the state level. I used to work in the state of California as well as Washington State directly on this particular program. So anyway, I want to just real quick give a reminder. If you have questions, by all means, please feel free to type them into the chat. We will be monitoring those as the presentation goes on. Mike Daniels might interject from time to time to just answer one of those questions or type an answer back. But if we're coming to a slide that's going to cover that question, we might hold off on answering it for a few minutes and then cover it when we get to the slide. And then we'll also hang on a little bit after the presentation to make sure that if anyone has any questions post-presentation, that we get those answered as well. So let's get into this. Value-added producer grant program, what is it? What's the purpose of it? It provides funds for economic planning activities or eligible working capital expenses to enable viable agriculture producers to develop businesses that produce and market value-added agricultural products and to create marketing opportunities for such businesses. Now, in a nutshell, what that is it basically means is this program is designed to assist producers, agricultural producers of an agricultural commodity entering into post-harvest value-added activities. The intent is for the producer themselves to benefit directly from the value-added project by capturing a larger portion of the potential market for the commodity, as well as the customer base and revenue stream from that product. This program, and this is the thing you should probably keep in mind as we go through this, it is all about the producer themselves. It is not designed to assist somebody down the processing line, although they can indirectly benefit. This program is designed and set up for the producer themselves to benefit from the program. Now, some of the misconceptions about the program and some of the things that value-added program is not. It's not a job training tool, although some aspects of training can be included in a project budget if it's directly related to the value-added project. It's also not intended to teach people how to farm. This program picks up from harvest forward, so seed to harvest, or up to the point of once if you have just the legal right to harvest a commodity, or if you're cultivating a commodity yourself and you're harvesting it, once you've gained access to that raw commodity from its harvested state forward, that's where this grant program kicks in. It's also not a technical assistance program, and it's not designed to do research or development, and there are no loan aspects to this program. It is a grant program, and it's also not intended to be a continuous stream of capital, meaning that should be a viable business that's applying for the producer grant. And by getting this grant, we're basically either helping you plan a project or implement a project and get it off the ground, so that once the grant comes to an end, the project can stand on its own. So it's not intended to continuously provide funding for that specific project. Now, talking a little bit about where we're at this year. The application window for FY 2022 opened on March 1st, and we have application deadlines of April 25th for electronic applications submitted through grants.gov, as well as May 2nd for paper applications. And paper applications are applications either hand delivered to a rural development office in the state, mailed and postmarked by May 2nd to a rural development state office, or emailed to a state office specialist in that state where the project is located. Now, the notice went out with $19.75 million in available funding. $2.75 million of those funds are leftover COVID-19 relief funds from last year. So they have a little bit of special caveat to those that I'll go over here in a second. But I wanted to point out that the $19.75 million was what was available at the time we put together the notice. Federal budget, and that is kind of moving its way through the system. I believe Congress passed that a day or so ago. Not sure if the president signed it yet or if it's gone through the Senate, but nonetheless, once a full year budget has been passed, we will more than likely get additional funds. That number of $19.75 million will likely grow. Now, if you're applying for the grant, maximum awards are going to be $75,000 for planning grants or $250,000 for working capital grants. This program does require a match. It's a one-to-one match program, and we will go over in a later slide how that in-kind match or cash match or whatever type of match you're contributing can be made up. But there is the $2.75 million in COVID-19 funds left over from last year. Those funds only require a $1 match for every $10 in grant. So a significantly reduced match for those funds, but we only have $2.75 million of those left. And regardless of whether someone asked for those $2.75 million in COVID funds and whether or not they provide a reduced cost share match budget, they will still be able to compete for those funds. Everyone's eligible for those funds. It's just saying that you can supply a reduced cost share match of $1 for every $10 in grants if you just so choose to apply for those funds. Now, if you do apply for those funds, we are requesting that if you want to also be considered for the the remainder of the $19.75 million in funding, that you provide a second budget with a one-to-one match. Otherwise, if you're not selected for funding from the COVID-19 relief pot, and you don't provide that additional one-to-one match budget, you will not move on in the competition. Now, some funding priorities with this program. We do set aside 10% for beginning and socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers. We also set aside 10% for mid-tier value chain projects, as well as 10% for persistent poverty county projects. Now, tribal nations are eligible for the socially disadvantaged farmer and rancher category, so they would be eligible for competition in the 10% reserve funds. Now, if you're not selected for the 10% reserve funds in one of these categories, you do automatically move on to the general fund categories, and continue on in the competition if you did not score high enough to be funded under one of these reserve fund categories. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the program basics and eligibility. We'll get into the applicant eligibility, the project eligibility, the purpose eligibility, and then talk about some other eligibility requirements, as well as this evaluation criteria, which is also known as the scoring of the grants. So let's talk a little bit about applicant eligibility. In order to apply for this grant, you have to meet one of the 4 definitions down below for one of the entity types, and that is an independent producer, an agricultural producer group, farmer rancher cooperative, or a majority controlled producer-based business venture. Now, an independent producer is kind of what it sounds like. It's your individually owned farm, maybe your family owned farm, you're a farm that's owned by a group of people, maybe an entity, a partnership, an LLC, something like that. But it's an individually owned farm that can also be a steering committee if you're looking to come in for an agriculture producer group, or say a farmer or rancher cooperative application. You could come in as an independent producer applicant and check the steering box committee, and then upon award, move over to one of the other categories. But typically an independent producer is usually just your solely owned and controlled farm. It also includes the harvesters. So if you do not cultivate a commodity, but you have the legal rights to go out and harvest a commodity, then you could apply as an independent producer as a harvester. Now, if within the state or within the tribe, you have a legally formed agricultural producer group, then you could apply under that heading, assuming that the majority of the members and the board of directors make up independent producers and they have the controlling rights to the agriculture producer group. So you can come in as an agriculture producer group applicant if you so choose. You can also come in as a farmer or rancher cooperative, and that needs to be owned and controlled by the independent producers, much like the agriculture producer group, and legally formed within the state or within the context of the tribe to operate as a cooperative. Now, in some situations, we have a mixture of ownership. A lot of times with the independent producer situation where you have multiple owners, maybe one of the owners of that farm doesn't meet the definition of an agriculture producer. Maybe they're a passive investor in the farm. As long as you have a majority that meet the definition of an agriculture producer, so they're involved in the day-to-day operations, farming, and what have you, then you could come in under the majority controlled producer-based business venture heading. Now, if an applicant comes in under this, you should be aware that only 10% of overall funding availability can go to projects under the majority controlled producer-based business venture heading. So once we hit a 10% limit, all funding will be cut off for those applicants. Now, in the past few years, we've only gotten to around 6 or 7% of the budget going towards projects that come in under this applicant type. So it hasn't been a problem, but just want to make sure that you're aware of that. I'm going to let Mike talk here a little bit about tribal applicant eligibility.
Thanks, Greg. So yeah, everything that Greg was talking about applicant eligibility applies also to the tribe. But really what we look at here is how, because tribal structures are unique in circumstances, as an agency, we're going to determine the ag producer and status of the federally recognized tribe or tribal entity without regard to the day-to-day labor, management, and field operation. Now that's been in play for several years within the reg. That came about as an administrative notice many years ago. Ted, I don't know if you remember exactly when that came out, but the Appendix A here is really going to be your guide to how the tribe is going to qualify to meet the definitions as a ag producer for the value add producer grant. Ted, was there anything you'd want to add to that?
No, Mike, thank you.
All right, Greg?
Yeah, thank you, Mike. And if you have any questions about whether or not you're eligible, I always recommend early and often getting a hold of the state office specialist in the state where the farm is located to talk to them about eligibility and they'll go over the situation, the scenario with you, and just make sure that you're applying under the right applicant type, all that type of stuff. It never hurts to get a hold of those folks often and early. Okay, so I talked about this a little bit before, but all applicant types must meet the definition of an agriculture producer. That's laid out there right in front of you, and that means that they have to participate in the day-to-day labor management and field operations of producing the agriculture commodity. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about this. Like I mentioned before, if you have a situation where you have multiple owners and somebody does not meet this definition, then you can do that majority controlled, assuming at least a majority of the applicants meet the definition of an agricultural producer. But this is key to this program. As I said early on in the presentation, this is all about the farmer, all about the producer, all about those that have the legal right to harvest the commodity. If you have that, then you are eligible to apply for this program. Now, all applicant types, regardless of which one you come in under, need to produce at least 51% of the agricultural commodity used in the value-added product. You have to produce a majority of the product yourself. You can, if you are not able to produce enough commodity yourself to do the project that you're looking to do, you can purchase additional commodity from another farmer, say down the road, or another farmer that's willing to sell you identical commodity. But you have to produce a majority yourself on your farm. And you have to own the raw commodity from seed through harvest, and then also through value-added production. So you have to you have to continue to have ownership of that commodity through the entire venture. Now, if you're coming in for this grant and you've come in for a grant in prior years, we do look at multiple grant eligibility. Applicants can come in for an additional grant if they do not have 75% common ownership in another project. And then those submitting a second application, say for a different project, are welcome to come in, but you may not submit an application for the same project that you was previously funded with working capital funds. So if you had a project in prior years and you're coming in for a different one, you will need to lay out and show us in the application toolkit how this project is different significantly and substantially from the prior project that was funded. And there is a discussion section built into the toolkit, so you'll be able to fill in a little bit of details about the prior project and how this one is different than that one. Now, if you have an active grant and you're looking to come in for a grant again this cycle, that's perfectly fine. Again, as long as the project is different than a previously funded project. Or let's say maybe you're coming in for a working capital grant this time because you had a planning grant and everything worked out well with the planning grant, and now you're looking to move on to a working capital project. That's perfectly fine as well. But the project that you're currently working on needs to be closed out within 90 days of the application deadline. So when the application deadline hits on May 2nd, you've got 90 days from then to finish your project. And that means turn in all your reporting, get everything taken care of. And then the project that you're currently applying for would be eligible to proceed in the competition. Now, project eligibility. In order for a project to be eligible, the commodity has to go through one of these value-added methodologies. The first is the change in physical state, and you have to produce in a manner that enhances the value of the agricultural commodity, physical segregation, farm or ranch-based renewable energy projects, and then locally produced agricultural food products. So talking a little bit about change in physical state, this is kind of the backbone of the program, and I think what really got it all started. You're taking a commodity that you produce on a farm. Let's say you're a dairy producer and you're harvesting the milk from the cows, and you want to take that and you want to make cheese, you want to make ice cream, you want to make something with that milk other than just sell the raw commodity itself. You're changing the physical state of it so it's irreversible and it enhances the value of it. Therefore, it qualifies for the value-added venture. There's some other examples here, like taking wheat and turning it into flour, wool into clothing, corn into ethanol, livestock into packaged meat. All of these are examples of change in physical state. Now, if you're not changing the physical state of the commodity, but you're producing it in a manner that enhances the value of that commodity. A great example of this is organic, maybe grass-fed beef, free-range chickens, where you're getting eggs that are produced from that. That is perfectly fine as well. And that would qualify under one of the methodologies for the value-added product. there's those examples that I was just talking about. And then the third one, physical segregation. Now, we don't see a whole lot of these. And I think the reason for that is because a lot of times products that kind of fit under this category also fit under the produced in a manner. So, they end up going that way. But physical segregation of a commodity is an option for a methodology. And, the best example of that is the example that's given down here, which is GMO corn produced, both grown, produced, and processed separately from, say, non-GMO corn. That in itself would be enough to qualify as a methodology to qualify for a value-added producer grant. Now, the fourth option would be a farmer ranch-based renewable energy project. And that's an agricultural commodity that is used to generate renewable energy on a farm or ranch. And that's the key to it. It has to be done on a farm or a ranch. And it has to be owned or leased by an independent producer applicant that produces the agricultural commodity. The most common project that we see under this category is the anaerobic digesters. Usually your dairy producers are coming in and they want to build one of these anaerobic digesters. That's perfectly fine. We've done both planning grants for these type of projects as well as working capital grants. So you qualify for both. But just note that generation of wind, solar, geothermal, hydro sources are not eligible. And the reason why they're not eligible is because you're not creating those sources of energy from the agricultural commodity that you're producing. You have to be creating the energy from an agricultural commodity that you're producing in order for the project to be eligible. And finally, and this one's picking up steam probably more than any of the other categories, it still holds a small percentage of the applications that come in, but you can apply as a locally produced agricultural food product, and keyword there is food product. So if you're taking your commodity and you're producing it and selling it within 400 miles of where it's produced, or within the state in which the product is produced, that in itself could be enough to qualify as a value-added product. So if you're taking it to a farmer's market, for example, let's say you grow apples and you're taking those locally grown in the state apples and you're selling them as a locally grown and produced food product that is going to be able to receive a little bit of an enhanced value for them because they're locally grown and produced, travel less distances, fresher, what have you. That in itself could be enough to qualify as a methodology for the value-added producer grant program. Now, one of the things that's really a hot topic as of late is hemp. And hemp was included in the 2018 Farm Bill, which is also known as the Agriculture Improvement Act of 2018, and made a legal product or legal commodity that you can grow and produce value-added products from. As long as the hemp is produced by a producer who has a license that is following all the requirements of the 2018 Farm Bill plan, then that producer can apply for a value-added producer grant project for different various hemp products. Now, that means that producer needs to be licensed either in a state or with the tribe that has an approved plan with AMS or the Agricultural Marketing Service, and they maintain a list of states and tribes that have those approved plans. And that link is included there on the slide. But as long as that producer is producing under that license and under a state or a tribe that has an approved plan, they could potentially apply. Now, this is an ever evolving and I should say quickly evolving category because lots changing with hemp on a daily basis. And I think one of the things I should point out is that we don't see any problems working with hemp that will be used for biomass, maybe fiber, textiles, or building materials. Additionally, there are several hemp products, like hemp seeds that could be marketed for human consumption that the FDA considers as generally recognized as safe and can be sold to consumers, but this is going to be on a case-by-case basis. The main issue that we're running into with hemp projects is those coming in under CBD oil. Now, FDA has basically previously ruled CBD as a drug, and consequently, any product marketed for human consumption containing CBD needs to be approved by FDA. We all know that there's considerable number of CBD oil products available in stores and online right now, but these products, and the FDA considers these products to be in violation of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. To date, other than issuing warnings, FDA has not been going after any manufacturers of CBD products, but we at Rural Development are following the lead of AMS and FDA when looking at hemp projects and value-added products created from hemp. So it really comes down to what type of product you're creating. If the product that you're creating is claiming health benefits and CBD, as mentioned, that type of thing, it's probably not going to be eligible. But if you're producing building materials, blocks, I saw one of those projects last year for blocks that are replacing concrete blocks or that type of thing, that's great. Maybe some wood products or wood replacement products or fiber, those are all great as well, just not the human consumption stuff. Now, all the applicants must demonstrate that they have an increased customer base and a greater portion of the revenue going back to the actual producer themselves by doing this venture. It's all about these two things. The farmer themselves has to show by doing this value-added project and this venture that they're going to be able to increase both of these criteria, which is the customer base and the revenue. Now, purpose eligibility. You can use the grant funds to do one of two different things. You can either come to us for a planning grant, which will pay a qualified third-party consultant to develop a feasibility study, marketing, and a business plan for you. Or if you have what I like to say is a shovel-ready project, meaning you have everything thought out, you know exactly how you're going to be producing it, where you're going to be producing it, the price points, you've got everything basically laid out and dialed in, and you're looking for a little capital injection, some implementation funds, you can come in for a working capital grant. And working capital grants really have three categories. So the first one is the emerging market. And an emerging market fits those products that a producer maybe has been producing or hasn't produced yet, but definitely has not produced for more than 2 years at the time of application. And they're taking that product and they're entering into emerging markets, new markets to them, and they're asking for more than $50,000. Then they can apply under this first option for working capital, but they will need to provide a feasibility study and a business plan. So if you're coming in under this option and it's a new product to you, but you don't have that feasibility study and business plan and marketing plan ready to go, the planning grant option might be the better bet for the first year. And then you can come back for the working capital grant in a subsequent funding cycle. Now, independent producers and independent producers only can come in for market expansion grants of $50,000 or more. And really what this does is if you've been producing a product and marketing and selling it for more than 2 years at the time of application, then you can come in under market expansion, and in lieu of that feasibility study, you can just provide a business plan or a marketing plan with the application. And then finally, those requesting less than $50,000, we consider that to be a simplified application, can waive the feasibility study and business plan requirements and just come in for that project, regardless of whether it's emerging market or market expansion. So those are the three options for working capital. Now, we talked a little bit about matching funds earlier, and this is basically how the matching funds break down. A lot of people get a little bit nervous about this when they find out it's a one-to-one match program. And you can make up your match with cash or cash that's coming from a loan, line of credit, or other forms of credit. That's perfectly fine. But in addition to cash, your time as a producer, or maybe say the family member's time working on the project, can count to help cover the match. And this particular category is capped at 25% of the total project cost. But you can contribute 25% of your labor, of your family's labor, to cover some of the matching requirements. And then the raw commodity itself is also eligible as an in-kind match. And this particular in-kind, and this gets confused with the applicant in-kind labor, this kind of in-kind does not have a cap. So you can contribute as much raw commodity as you want to the project and use what the value of that raw commodity is to offset match. And then there's also third-party cash and third-party in-kind. So if I was looking at this, and my advice to you would be to kind of think about it this way. If you're putting together a project, what I would probably do is start with the raw commodity first, because there is no limit to that, right? Figure out how much raw commodity you're going to be using towards this value-added venture, and figure out what the value of that raw commodity is in its harvested state, and start there. That'd be the first thing I would check off on my match. And then if I still have some shortfall there and I need to make up additional match, then you can look at the applicant or family in-kind labor. That'll probably make up a good portion of the remainder of the match. And then if you're still not covering everything that you need to cover, then you can look at applicant cash, loans, or line of credit. But if you do it in that order, I think you'll find it a little bit easier to make up the matching requirement and avoid large cash injections into the project. Now, in normal years, if you provide cash match, you would get additional points in the scoring. So you get a little bit of bump in your overall score and ultimately increase your chances of getting funded, but it is a small amount of points. This particular year, because of those COVID-19 relief funds and because of the way the match is set up with those reduced match option for the $2.75 million in funding, we've waived that point section for cash match. So cash match does not play into the scoring this cycle. It probably will in future cycles. A little bit more about the match. It has to be equal to at least the grant amount. So 50% of the project. So if you're coming in for a $250,000 working capital grant, you need $250,000 of eligible match. It needs to be spent on eligible expenses and needs to be spent in advance of grant funding. So if you come into us, say you have a project awarded and you come in for a $25,000 reimbursement, then you need to also show us $25,000 of match that's been spent at that same time, so that we can reimburse you the $25,000. And also needs to be from from eligible sources without real or apparent conflicts of interest. And then the exception, we talked about this earlier, but the COVID-19 relief funds only require a 10% match. But again, there's only $2.75 million in funding available for those COVID-19 relief fund projects. Now, some eligible and ineligible uses of funds. We talked about planning grants. That is very straightforward, and I mentioned this earlier. It can pay for a qualified consultant to prepare a feasibility study, business plan, and marketing plan. Not much more than that. Planning grant is really basically those applicants coming in that have an idea in mind, but they don't have it 100% solidified. They kind of know what they're going to do, but they don't know how well it's going to work out, whether it's feasible, whether it's likely to be successful. Planning grants are great for this, and it can pay for these three things. But if you have a project that's ready to go, again, shovel-ready project, you're welcome to come in under working capital, and we can pay for an assortment of post-harvest activities. So we can pay for the cost of processing that raw commodity into its value-added product. And with that one, it can be numerous different things. It can be labor that you're paying someone outside of the family to help process it. It can be an expense to pay a co-packer to process the commodity for you into the value-added product. It can be expenses associated with you running your own facility to get it going. But what it can't do is if you're doing it in your own facilities, it can't pay for real estate improvements or equipment or those types of things. We can also pay for product packaging, labeling, maybe shipping, anything needed to get that product and package it for sale to the consumers. It can also pay for ingredients to make the product. If you have a raw commodity, but maybe you're making salsa. So you're growing a couple of the vegetables that are going to be in the salsa, but you need to buy additional ingredients to finish up that salsa, perfectly fine. As long as the core or the main product being produced is what's going in, on the farm, I should say, is going into that product. We can also pay for promotional materials, advertising, marketing, web development, social media advertising, numerous different types of promotional materials and advertising with grant funds.
Hey, Greg.
Sure. Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, there's a question out here because you're right in this wheelhouse right now. Applicant in-kind labor up to 25% of consideration. Does this mean you have to forego wages? You want to take that one?
Yeah, no. So you as the producer, if you're the owner of the farm, or say it's your direct family members, maybe your children, your spouse, whoever it is, whatever the value of their time, all farmers put a lot of work, put a lot of their sweat into the actual production of the commodity as well as the processing into the value-added product. Whatever time you're putting into that value-added product is worth something. So when you calculate that out, we're not going to pay you the wages for doing it, but what we will allow you to do is we'll allow you to calculate out that time that you're spending on the project at a fair market rate. And then whatever that is, you can offset match with that, as long as it's not more than 25% of the project. And when I say 25% of the project, what I mean is you have $250,000 grant, $250,000 match, that's a $500,000 project. So 25% of that would be $125,000 could go or could be contributed from in-kind labor. But we would never reimburse you for that expenses to pay yourself with grant funds. So it would be considered in-kind contribution to the project. Hope that answers that one. So let's talk about some ineligible uses of funds. So expenses related to ag production. Remember I said this is a post-harvest grant. So no ag production expenses, no planning, repairing, building of a facility, no real estate improvements. Use of grant funds to pay yourself or associated parties for the subject raw commodity. We cannot pay you for your commodity, but what you can do is you can use your commodity to offset match. So whatever the value of the commodity is that you're contributing to this project from the farm, that can go to offset match. And we will also not pay for equipment expenses. And this is kind of a big one. We see it every year. If something has a useful life of more than 1 year and a value of more than $5,000, it's considered equipment by the federal government's 2 CFR regulation, and therefore would not be eligible for the program. Some other things to note about ineligible expenses. If you have an application with an ineligible expenses and they tally to more than 10% of the total project cost, your application will be deemed ineligible. However, if you have less than 10% of ineligible expenses included in your budget, we will allow that project to continue on in the competition and scoring. And then if awarded, we would require you take those 10% or less in ineligible expenses out of your project budget. So there is a threshold or a cutoff between eligible and ineligible when it comes to ineligible expenses. Now, what I would encourage you to do here is, I know I mentioned this earlier, but reach out to your state offices early and often about your project, talk to them about it, especially your budget, and run the expense items through them, and they will help you and provide you advice on what can and cannot be included in your project budget, especially if there's any gray area and you're uncertain. Now, the grant periods for the grant, it's up to 36 months. Now, typically a planning grant is usually a 12-month or less project. Working capital grants, you'll see those go out to 36 months, but 36 months is the maximum term for a grant. That said, project shouldn't just be written up for a 36-month grant automatically. The project and the term of the project should fall in line with the scope of work. So, whatever it is you're doing, should have a timeline kind of associated with it that you need that project up to 36 months. Now, evaluation criteria. Each grant that's submitted and deemed eligible will go through a scoring process and will be scored on these 5 criteria. So there's the nature of the proposed project, the qualification of the project personnel, commitment and support, the work plan and budget, and there are some priority points that can be added as well. You'll find in the back of the toolkit, and I believe it starts at section 6.2, you'll find these criterion listed out, and there'll be lengthy questions being asked. And by lengthy, I mean the first one is in paragraph form. There's kind of a lot of information in there that we're wanting from you or wanting to hear from you. Make sure you read that thoroughly. Make sure you answer every aspect of those questions being asked in that section. And that'll help you get the highest score and up to 30 points for that section. Same thing when you talk about the qualification personnel. Make sure you cover all the criteria covered in that section. And what I mean by that is the information about the specific personnel that are going to be contributing to the project. Make sure you provide information on all of those folks. Commitment and support. You get up to 0 to 10 points, and your work plan and budget's 0 to 20 points. And then there's also priority points, like I said. Those priority points, if you come in as a beginning farmer, rancher, veteran farmer, or rancher, say a socially disadvantaged farmer, rancher, any one of these 6 options here, you can get up to 5 priority points. Now, if you meet more than one of these, that's great. But pick the one that's easiest based off of the appendices in the back of the toolkit to verify, and just select that one, because we'll only give you credit for 5 points total. So if you meet any one of these, you automatically get the 5 points. Now, if you come in as a group applicant type, so that's the agricultural producer groups, the farmer rancher cooperative, so the majority controlled producer-based business venture, and you meet certain criteria, you can get up to an additional 5 more priority points added to your application. Now, last year, we had a pretty banner year, and a lot of that had to do with the COVID-19 relief funds. We had 828 applications that came in, and 546 of those right off the bat were knocked down in eligibility. Excuse me, I shouldn't say 500, 546 made it through eligibility, so we dropped off quite a few during the eligibility review. I will tell you that more often than not, when we get applications in, and we got 828 last year, you get a handful of applications from applicants who turn them in on deadline day. They never consulted the state office. They didn't have anybody do a cursory review of the application. They didn't run questions by the state offices. And unfortunately, because of the nature of this program, they miss things. And because of that, they get deemed ineligible. But you'll notice that of the eligible applications, the 546, we funded 430 of those. That percentage, fluctuates from year to year, but we do fund a high percentage of the projects that we consider to be eligible. So with that said and that information there, again, reach out to the state offices early and often. They will help you make sure that you make it past that 828 to the 400 or 546 drop off, or whatever that number ends up being this year, and make it through the eligibility so that you can continue on and compete in scoring and ultimately be one of those 430 people that scored high enough last year and that were ultimately funded. Again, though, last year we had quite a bit of funding available. We have 19.75 that we know of this year. I know there's more money coming in the appropriation, so that number will grow, but it won't be quite what it was last year. But nonetheless, that'll give you an idea of, kind of where the drop-offs are with the applications that we do receive. Now, of the applications we received, the vast majority of them, sure.
Greg, just go back. There was a question, I'm messing up in the chat, on eligible project expense. The question was, can we have equipment as an eligible project expense? And we cannot. There's just maybe a little confusion in one of the slides. So I just wanted to make sure that I got back to the person that asked that question. So
yeah, and Mike's absolutely right. And we consider equipment something that has a useful life of more than 1 year and a value of more than $5,000. So if it's less than that, it's considered a supply. But the overall theme should be that equipment is not eligible for this program. Supplies are eligible for the program. I hope that helps answer it too. Okay, so we talked a little bit about working capital applications again. Vast majority of the applications we receive come in the form of a working capital. 10% last year were in planning grant applications. This percentage or this spread is pretty common from year to year. We do receive the vast majority of our applications in the form of working capital. Average grant amounts that doesn't really change much from year to year either. Average grant amounts 166,000. Working capital grants are obviously much larger at 180,000 than the planning grants that came in at 43,000 last year. Now, of the applicants that apply, the vast majority meet that definition of an independent producer, but we do receive applications from the other applicant types. It just represents a minority portion of the applications we received. About priority points, some folks do check more than one of the boxes, but the primary box that they qualify under, we try to capture it here on this slide to kind of show you. Priority points are spread out over a lot of the categories. Socially disadvantaged farmers and ranchers do make up the largest priority group that receive priority points from us. Little breakdown here and kind of shows you, and you'll see the spreads don't change much from year to year, but this is the difference between the applications in blue that receive priority points and the applications that did not receive any priority points in any given year. And then the methodology. So I talked about change in physical state being the backbone of the program. Most of the applications we receive are in that change in physical state category, but produced in a manner and locally marketed do cover a large portion of the other piece of the pie. Physical segregation and farm or ranch-based renewable energy projects. We don't usually see a lot of those applications, but we do see some from time to time. Now, Yeah, I'm gonna go back a slide here. So wanted to give you a little bit of information about tribes from last year. Last year, we had 10 tribes, or 10 tribal entities, I should say, apply for a value-added producer grant. Of those 10, 7 were deemed eligible. And of those 7, 6 of those were funded. And I think we funded about $1.15 million worth of applications for tribal entities last year. We would like to see that number go up. But that's what we were looking at out of 430 applications that were funded last cycle. Now, there's several tools out there to help you apply for this grant. If you go to the Value Added Producer Grant webpage, you will find the application toolkits. There is one for working capital and there's another one for planning grants. Make sure you select the appropriate one. And those toolkits will walk you through how to apply. Literally just start at the top and go to the end. There's hyperlinks in there for all the forms or all the places you need to go to register. And then the toolkits will then take you right through a template for applying that will include sections to answer questions, maybe check boxes, fill in narratives about your project. It'll walk you through the entire thing. You're not required to use the application toolkits, but I will tell you that those that do use it, which is the vast majority of the applicants, you have a much better chance of being successful. Those that go at it without the toolkits usually end up missing something or forgetting something. If you follow the toolkit, you'll probably do pretty well. There are some tools for applicants as well included on our website. There's some general information. There's a fact sheet about locally produced food products, anaerobic digesters, harvesters, mid-tier value chains, all included on our webpage that give great examples of what qualifies and what doesn't. Anaerobic digesters or those renewable energy projects. There's a great breakdown of what kind of expenses, because that's not your traditional value-added project. So there's a breakdown on there of different expenses and categories that we can pay for with grant funds there. That'll give you an idea of whether or not the project's a fit. If you have any questions at all, you're always welcome to contact either myself or Mike, and then Dan with the Intertribal Agriculture Council. We'll be more than happy to help and point you in the right direction on your value-added project. So I'm going to leave this up here for a few minutes, and then Mike, if you don't mind, if we have any questions coming in.
We've had several questions, and maybe you can just go over a couple of them. Just a question on if you had to be growing the ag commodity and making the value-added commodity. Yes, you really do have to be doing both. So, in the past, I've had questions to somebody that's a cheese maker. They're buying milk from the local farmers and making cheese. That's great, but nobody's eligible to apply. You have to actually be milking the cows and also making the cheese. What type of costs are involved in a value-added producer grant? In a working capital, all your working capital, your cost of production, your distribution costs, things of that nature, construction, repair, upgrades, or processing, those are not allowed. All right. What are the benefits or drawbacks of doing a planning grant? Really, the planning grant is there to help you answer a question, whether or not the value-added venture is viable. If you know to determine what your price points are, what your cost of production is, what's the demand, what's the price point that somebody's willing to buy that product. But if you have a feasibility study that says, yeah, this is a viable venture, you have your business plan, you have your marketing plan, then you really should probably be looking at the working capital. Greg, questions are, will slides be available after the webinar? I know it's being recorded. I think we can probably drop those somewhere also.
Yeah, I gave a copy of the PowerPoint to Dan. I'm pretty sure he's going to share that.
Okay. And then what percent of cost will value added pay? Our normal program, it's a dollar for dollar cost. So for every dollar of grant, we're looking at $1 of match. And again, understand that with value added, you have the ability for in-kind, and not only the labor, but also the cost of the ag commodity, the raw ag commodity as it's harvested from the field. That can make up a lot of the match component. There is, as Greg had talked about, that 2.75 million that's available this year that has a little bit of that COVID funding that's still available, where it's a 10-to-1 match, $10 of grant for 10 cents of match. So that's available, but that's a small percentage of what we're really looking at for this year.
Also add that the recording for this webinar will be available on IAC's YouTube channel. It's also, the live stream will be available on the Facebook page right now.
Dan, were there questions on Facebook Live that we should address?
Someone was asking if this information will be available.
Okay.
So that's part of, also responding to that, is that we'll have it there. And we do also have the slides here. So someone can email me if they need it. We'll work on finding a location to get them posted as well.
And then there's a question to clarify on financing funding. Would that be to purchase, rent, or build a facility for production? No, bricks and sticks are not going to be eligible. If say you need to have a commercial kitchen to process your product, you could lease space at a commercial kitchen, but it could not be on a lease to own type of basis. It would have to be just leasing it for however many hours a month that you need it to process your value-added product. Other questions? Greg, I think everything has been addressed here. So,
Okay.
Mike
Yeah,
and
you're
Greg,
welcome.
I was going to
Yeah.
underscore one thing that you mentioned, Greg, just because there wasn't a slide on it, but you talked about some of the tribal metrics for applicant eligibility and who was scored. So the math was that I heard got 10 tribal applications from tribal applicants last year. 7 of those were eligible. So 3 dropped off in eligibility and 6 of those were funded. I think the point I'd like to underscore is if you're interested in this program, work with Dan Cornelius or his counterpart in the Intertribal Ag Council. Reach out to Rural Development early and often so that you have an eligible project. It's really important. You don't want to not make it to that scoring round, and the folks within Rural Development and at IAC can help you get to that eligible project. So I don't think that can be underscored enough. So use these contacts on the screen right now, use their expertise, and look forward to seeing those applications this year. Wanted to thank Dan because Dan's done a really good job of keeping this in front of tribal producers of all sorts. So thanks, Dan, for your continued advocacy.
And Ted, I would take that a step further. Get to know your people in the states where you reside, because they're the ones that are going to be reviewing that application. And when I worked in Wisconsin, I had a lot of good relationships with the tribal community that we were able to be successful, get some through. So I would really urge you to reach out to them. They're a very good source of information, and they really do want to help provide. We want to get the money out the door to the most deserving people that have the best projects. So I'd be happy to work with you. There was one other question that came in. Can you purchase tractors or equipment? No, this is not, again, it's for the cost of producing the value-added product. The tractor, even if we can't do equipment, but tractor actually would be on the production side. And as Greg said, it'd be, once that strawberry is harvested, that's when value added starts, and that's when the expenses for the program can start. Nothing during the agricultural production side.
Yeah, and I guess I just would add on that, my contact information's here. We have a technical assistance network that can work with folks if you have some of those broader questions of where you get funding. And tractors are going to be a tough one for individuals to be able to find grant funds for, but we're happy to talk to you and provide more technical assistance on possible strategies to fund that. And I think a lot of where this program it can help is to really provide a sustainable ongoing source of income that you're going to be able to help to fund some of the rest of that. But there are a couple of grants out there that we can talk with you in greater detail on. Not a lot for equipment though.
And Matthew, you talked about the question, the building and establishment is not funded, but planning, consulting on a project is. Yes, to put together a feasibility study, a business plan, a marketing plan for the business, not directly to say, how can I build this building to process, but look at the enterprise that you're looking at funding, that, you know, the strawberry jam, the wine, the beef that you're raising. What's your market for the beef? That's really what we're looking for the feasibility study and business plan that in the planning portion. But again, Dan, I think you have some people that would be able to help with that, as the states would be able to help with that also.
You know, and with the processing equipment, we had another question there. Can this be used for the processing equipment? You know, generally, no, it's not going to be able to. There are a couple other programs. The Rural Business Development Grant may be an opportunity. There's, and Mike, I know, has worked a lot with that program too. There are a couple of you know, challenges there, but that would be a program more that could fund for certain entities that type of a kitchen equipment. But where this program, it can help to offset your staffing, your packaging, your transportation costs, to help to give a little bit more breathing room on some of those other expenses. Well, we are at time. I want to thank our rural development program staff and Ted Bilo, tribal liaison, for joining us today. Contact information is here. Again, the recording of this will be on IAC's YouTube channel, and we're happy to help to provide more assistance. So thank you, everybody. Have a good day.
Take care. Be well.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.